It all started with a strange transmission intercepted on a cold December night, one I was never meant to hear. On December 17th, 1995, during a routine night shift at the Coast Guard Communications Center in Juneau, Alaska, I picked up a signal that should have been reserved for a select few up the chain of command. But the system doesn't always filter perfectly, and sometimes the wrong ears catch the right messages. Mayday, Mayday, this is the vessel Northern Light. We have several injured on board. Something's not right. They're turning violent, attacking the rest of the crew, requesting immediate medevac. The voice was frantic, clipped by panic. What followed still haunts me. Agonized screams, crashing noises, utter chaos, then nothing, just static. That eerie silence told me more than any follow-up transmission could. Roughly 2 hours later, another call came through, this time from land, same region, reporting numerous violent outbreaks in town. Medical teams are overwhelmed. State troopers needed immediately. Casualties are mounting. Though the speaker sounded composed, years in this job had trained me to hear the hidden tremor, that brittle edge of terror people try to mask when the world's cracking around them. My supervisor personally handled the second call. After speaking briefly, he turned to me and said I should take an early break. "Just a fishing accident," he muttered, trying to brush it off. But I saw the way his fingers trembled as he hung up. His face was pale, drawn tight, with something unspoken. This was no routine emergency, and when I returned, it was like nothing had happened at all. Every log entry from Whittier was wiped clean. According to official records, not a single distress call had been made that night. I didn't need to be told to keep quiet. Questions had consequences. Within 3 weeks, I was reassigned to Kodiak. No explanation, no prior notice. But I had already begun piecing things together, tracing whispers and discrepancies. Back then I was 27, 5 years into my Coast Guard career. The post in Juneau was temporary, meant to last 6 months before I moved to San Diego. Sunshine, beaches, and an escape from the isolating chill of Alaska. I had already requested the transfer, eager to leave behind the freezing dark and the colleagues who found my meticulous habits and persistent curiosity a little too much to handle. But that night, the one they tried to erase, stuck with me. I knew it was more than a miscommunication, more than a freak accident. It was something they didn't want anyone to know, something they made disappear. Reynolds documents everything like he's preparing for a congressional hearing someday, my supervisor quipped during a team meeting. The room erupted in laughter. I didn't join in. For me, being thorough was simply part of doing my job right. But after those transmissions and my abrupt reassignment to Kodiak, a heavy sense of unease settled over me. During my first week at the new post, I tried digging into the communications from that December night, but they'd been locked behind classified status. When I brought it up to my supervisor, the way she looked at me sent a chill down my spine. "Reynolds," she said quietly, almost like a warning, "let me offer you some advice. Drop whatever it is you think you know, for your own sake." Later that evening, I discovered a note slipped beneath my door. It said only, "Whittier wasn't the first, and it won't be the last. Bar, Northern Lights, 10 p.m. I should have thrown it away, ignored it, acted like I never saw it, but that wasn't in my nature. The Northern Lights was a worn-out bar where weathered fishermen and Coast Guard staff blew off steam. When I arrived at 10, the place was buzzing, loud voices, clinking bottles, the usual crowd. I grabbed a beer and waited. 20 minutes dragged by. I was starting to think someone was messing with me when a grizzled man sat down beside me. Mid-50s, leathery skin, hands scarred by years of work in the ocean. "You Reynolds?" he asked, eyes fixed ahead. "Depends. Who's asking?" "Jack," he said. "I was first mate on the Bering Star. We were docked in Whittier on December 17th. My heart picked up speed." "What happened?" Jack took a slow sip of his drink. "First, I need to know why you care. This isn't something folks want to get into without a good reason." I laid it all out for him, the intercepted calls, the vanished logs, my reassignment. As I talked, his face darkened. "Figures," he muttered. "They're sweeping it under the rug, same as they did with Nome in '92 and Barrow in '84. "What are you saying?" He leaned in, voice hushed. "Those weren't fishing incidents no matter what you were told. What happened there, and in Whittier, it's not what people think." His eyes darted across the room before sliding a small folded paper toward me. "Here, my address. Come tomorrow, noon sharp." What I need to say isn't for public ears, but Jack never got to share his story. When I arrived the next day, his apartment door hung half open. Inside, the apartment was a mess. Everything had been torn apart. There was no trace of him. He had disappeared, along with any chance I had of learning the truth through proper channels. That was the moment I realized I'd have to take matters into my own hands, no matter the danger. I claimed a family emergency to get leave, an excuse that would ultimately end my career, and flew to Anchorage. After landing, I rented a vehicle and set off toward Whittier. Back in 1995, the Anton Anderson Memorial Tunnel, the only land route into Whittier, wasn't yet open for regular vehicles. The sole way in was either by boat or through the railroad tunnel on specific transport shuttles. As I neared the tunnel entrance, I was stopped at a checkpoint that wasn't listed on any official records or maps. Two men in black, unmarked jackets were standing guard. They didn't look like military or police. The badges on their clothing didn't match any known organization I'd ever seen. "Whittier's shut down for seasonal maintenance," one of them told me. "Access is restricted." "I'm with the Coast Guard," I replied, holding up my credentials. "We've been notified." He cut in firmly before I could continue. His hand rested lightly near his weapon. "Turn back. Return to Anchorage, now." I obeyed, for the time being, but I had no intention of giving up. I only needed to find an alternate way in. Once back in Anchorage, I checked into a roadside motel and started making calls. I contacted old Coast Guard colleagues, fishermen familiar with Prince William Sound, and even a few investigative reporters. Most didn't answer. The few who did either pleaded ignorance or refused to talk. 3 days in, I was sipping bitter coffee in a small diner when a woman slid into the seat across from me. She looked to be in her early 30s, with tightly pulled back dark hair and eyes that kept flicking toward the entrance. "You're asking about Whittier," she said. It wasn't a question. I studied her carefully. "Who are you?" "Dr. Bakers," she replied. I was on the CDC team deployed to Whittier last December. She handed me a sealed envelope. Take this, but don't open it here. Why are you giving this to me? I asked. Her stare locked onto mine. I saw fear there, but also resolve. Because whatever happened in Whittier is happening again, and unless someone brings it to light, they'll keep burying it. Before I could ask anything more, she stood abruptly. If anyone asks, I was never here. You and I never spoke. Wait, I called out, but she was already on her way out the door. How do I reach you if I have more questions? She hesitated a moment. You don't. But there's someone in Seward who might help you make sense of what you've found. Go to the harbor master's office and ask for Morgan. And just like that, she disappeared, leaving me clutching an envelope I wasn't sure I had the courage to open, and a mind swirling with uncertainty. Back in the motel, I bolted the door, pulled the curtain shut, and slowly opened the package. Inside were copies of medical files, eerie photographs, and pages torn from a handwritten diary. The journal had belonged to a doctor, Thomas Reed, seemingly another CDC doctor sent into Whittier. The earliest entry was marked December 18, 1995. We reached Whittier at 0600. Military teams had already locked down the area. Initial findings showed 27 deceased, 43 affected by a mysterious illness. Symptoms include violent behavior, decreased cognitive responses, tissue decay, and uncontrollable hunger. First priority is isolation. Understanding the cause can wait. The initial infection seems to trace back to a sailor from the fishing trawler Northern Light, which had recently returned from near Russian territory. Crew claimed their nets snagged something bizarre near the Diomede Islands. A sample was requested from their storage. If this leaks outside Whittier, God help us. I leafed through the photos, clinical shots of people with darkened limbs and lifeless, clouded eyes. One showed a soldier watching over what looked like a pit of burning corpses. The medical files were full of technical jargon I didn't recognize, but some descriptions leapt off the page. Similar to rabies, but mutates rapidly. Transfers through bodily contact, especially saliva. Incubation time is 3 to 6 hours based on exposure point. Can only be stopped by massive brain damage. I dropped the pages, my fingers shaking. It felt like fiction, a nightmare. This couldn't be an actual CDC file. But the detailed notes, the scientific phrasing, and the government-stamped documents, it all seemed disturbingly real. Either I'd stumbled on a horrifying truth, or I was the target of a very convincing deception. I had to find out. I placed everything back into the envelope with care and set off for Seward to track down Morgan. The road wound through the breathtaking landscapes of the Seward Highway, but that day I barely noticed any of it. My thoughts were still consumed by the terrifying contents of that report. When I arrived at the harbor master's office in Seward and asked for Morgan, I was pointed toward an aging structure at the edge of the marina. Morgan was a woman likely in her 60s, with silvery hair and the deep tan of someone who'd clearly spent her life at sea. "I don't recognize you," she said as I stepped into her office. "Dr. Baker sent me from Anchorage." At that, Morgan's face shifted slightly. She quietly locked the door, lowered the blinds, and said, "Show me what you brought." I passed her the envelope, She spent close to an hour going through everything, her expression darkening with every page she examined. "This is just the beginning," she finally said. "So it's authentic. What really happened in Whittier?" Morgan gave a solemn nod. "It didn't start there. It goes back to a Soviet science ship that vanished in the Bering Sea in 1982. We knew nothing about it then. It was a secret military mission by the Soviets. They were developing biological agents, tools meant to sow chaos if war broke out. Biological agents that do what? Create zombies?" I felt foolish saying it aloud. Morgan didn't flinch. "That's the term most people use, yes, but it's not quite that simple. They're still alive, technically. The virus takes control of the emotional brain, pushing the infected into an endless state of fury and hunger while shutting down the parts responsible for reasoning. The decaying flesh happens after, as their bodies begin to break down, since they stop doing basic things like eating or sleeping. And this virus, it came from the Soviets. In the beginning, yes, but what makes it lethal now is how it's changed. The original strain from the Soviets couldn't last long. Victims died in a matter of days. But the version that reached Whittier? It had evolved. Those infected lasted longer and passed it on more effectively. I recalled the diary note about fishermen dragging up something strange by the Diomede Islands. So they found that ship after all this time. No, not the ship. One of the scientists. Morgan's voice sounded empty. He'd been frozen in the ice. When they thawed him to confirm his identity, I began, "He was still alive." Morgan nodded. He was. She took out a large map of Alaska and laid it open across her desk. Then she marked 3 places: Nome, Barrow, and Whittier. 1984, 1992, and 1995. Each time they responded fast, locked the zones down, got rid of the infected, incinerated the corpses, buried the truth, and each time they thought it was over. She marked another spot further inland, but it has returned. A small mining town near Denali had its first incident 3 days ago. How do you know all this? Morgan met my gaze, her eyes filled with sorrow, because I was part of the containment unit in Barrow, because my son was stationed in Whittier with the National Guard when the outbreak began. Her voice quivered slightly. "The official report says he died in a training accident." Now I understood why she was helping me. She wanted the truth exposed as much as I did. "What happened to Dr. Reed?" I asked, referring to the author of the journal. "Officially, he died in a helicopter crash while being transported back to Anchorage." Morgan's face told me she didn't believe the official version. What about Dr. Baker? Why is she risking everything to reveal this? Because she knows what they're planning. The pathogen is evolving faster than they can contain it. The outbreaks are spreading further and getting bigger. They're running out of solutions. Morgan leaned forward. "Have you heard about their plan?" I shook my head. "Well, it's just a backup plan," she continued. "If they can't contain an outbreak, they'll initiate it. Complete isolation of Alaska's interior. They'll pretend it's an environmental disaster, maybe a nuclear incident at one of the Cold War-era sites. They'll evacuate the coastline and close off the rest." "That's insane," I protested. "They can't just do that to American citizens. They've done it before, but on a smaller scale. Like I said, Whittier, Nome, Barrow. Everyone who saw the infected was either evacuated and sworn to secrecy, or she didn't need to finish the sentence. I leaned back, trying to digest it all. What can I do? I'm just a Coast Guard communications officer. You have access, and you've been trained to document things properly. Morgan pulled a small recorder from her desk. Start with the testimony of someone who was there, someone who survived Whittier. The tape recorder played the account of James Kowalski, a maintenance worker for the Alaska Railroad who had been in Whittier when the outbreak started. His voice was steady, yet it carried a sense of dread as he recalled the events of that night. It all began at the harbor. The Northern Light had just docked, and a few crew members appeared to be unwell, seriously unwell. But it was December in Alaska. Everyone had something. No one thought much of it until one of the crew members collapsed at the Anchor, the bar near the harbor. I was there having a beer after my shift. This guy, I didn't even know his name, just collapsed and started shaking. Foam started coming out of his mouth, his eyes rolling back. Someone yelled for a doctor, and they dragged him into the back room. About 20 minutes later, we heard screaming. 3 people came running out of that back room, covered in blood. One of them had a chunk of his cheek missing. Then the sick guy came out, but he wasn't twitching anymore. He looked different. His movements were stiff, almost robotic, and his eyes were completely clouded over. And he was making this terrible moaning sound. He grabbed the bartender, Frank, and bit into his neck, tearing his throat right there in front of everyone. Pandemonium broke out after that. People were running, screaming, fighting to escape. I made it outside just as the police showed up. But by then, the people who'd been bitten in the bar were starting to change too. It spread through the town like wildfire. I took shelter in the railroad maintenance shed with a few others. We could hear the screams echoing across the town all night. By morning, military helicopters were arriving with soldiers in hazmat suits. They started going from building to building. We thought they were there to save us. We were wrong. They were there to contain the outbreak. Anyone showing symptoms was shot on the spot. The rest of us were rounded up and divided into groups. Those with injuries, even small cuts or scrapes, were taken away for medical evaluation. Big surprise, they never came back. I was one of the lucky ones. No injuries, no contact with the infected. They loaded us onto a helicopter and flew us to an airfield near Anchorage, a military base. We were held there for 2 weeks, interrogated every day, given the same story over and over. It was a chemical spill from a Russian cargo ship. Mass hysteria had caused people to turn on each other. What we saw, what we thought happened, wasn't real. After 2 weeks, they let us go, made us sign NDAs, and warned us that we'd face prosecution under national security laws if we ever talked about what happened. Most people just wanted to forget it all. But I know what I saw. Those people in Whittier, my friends, my neighbors, they became something else, something no longer human. And the government is hiding it. God knows why. Maybe because they're scared of what would happen if the truth came out. Maybe they're worried people will start asking why it all began in the first place. All I know is I'm telling you this because the truth needs to be out there. people need to be ready. I don't think this is finished. The recording ended there. I rewound it and played it again, listening closely and writing down every word. Once I was done, I sat in silence for a moment, trying to make sense of Kowalski's story alongside the medical records in Reed's journal. "Where's Kowalski now?" I asked Morgan. She shook her head. "He died in a house fire 3 months after that testimony. The official cause was a faulty space heater." "Convenient," I muttered. "Oh, there's more. The CDC reports mentioned something from the ship's hold. They found something in their nets. Do we know what it was?" "Not exactly, but I have a contact at the University of Alaska Fairbanks who might. He's a marine biologist who helped with the Nome incident in '92. He's waiting for you." She handed me a slip of paper with an address. "Dr. Fallon, he'll tell you what you need to know about the origins." As I stepped out of Morgan's office, I could feel someone watching me. A black SUV sat across from the marina. 2 men in dark suits were keeping an eye on the harbormaster's building. I ducked into a crowd of tourists, then slipped down an alley and out a service exit. They were already onto me. I had to move fast. The drive to Fairbanks was long, giving me plenty of time to reflect on everything I'd learned, trying to figure out if I was just being paranoid or if my instincts were right. I took back roads and detours, steering clear of main highways where I could be spotted. I left my rental car behind and bought an old pickup truck with cash from a local who didn't ask questions. I paid extra for him to take care of the paperwork later. Dr. Fallon's cabin was on the outskirts of Fairbanks, tucked away among spruce trees. When I arrived, the place was dark. I approached cautiously and knocked on the door. No response. I tried the handle. It turned easily, and the door swung open. Inside, the cabin was a mess. Books and papers were scattered across the floor. Furniture was overturned. It looked like there had been a struggle, or maybe just a hurried exit. On the kitchen table, there was a single envelope with my name written on it. Inside was a USB drive and a handwritten note. "If you're seeing this, they reached me before you could. Everything I know is on this drive. The truth is far darker than you could ever expect. They weren't just after it, they were hunting it down. Be cautious about who you trust. No one is who they appear to be. Fallon." A sharp noise outside jolted me, making me dive for cover. The glow of headlights cut through the cabin's windows as a vehicle came to a stop. I quickly slipped the drive into my pocket and made my way out the back door, heading into the woods just as I heard car doors slamming shut. Hiding among the trees, I watched as 4 men clad in tactical gear entered the cabin. They moved with military precision, weapons at the ready. They weren't local authorities, not the FBI, something far more covert. I stayed concealed until they left, taking with them boxes of Fallon's research. Once they had gone, I made my way back to my truck and drove to the nearest motel with internet access. The drive contained a trove of files, research documents, correspondence, and video footage. I began with a file labeled Nome Incident, 1992. Fallon had been brought in to examine a sample retrieved from the Nome site following the containment efforts there. His report described an organism unlike any other, a prehistoric microorganism that had been preserved in the permafrost for potentially millions of years. The organism displayed traits of both bacteria and viruses, yet fit neither classification. It seemed capable of remaining dormant for extended periods at freezing temperatures, only to reactivate when exposed to heat. Once active, it aggressively targeted neural tissue, specifically the parts of the brain responsible for higher cognitive functions, while leaving basic survival functions intact. More disturbingly, it appeared to modify the host's DNA to aid in its transmission. Those infected became increasingly hostile, exhibiting a strong oral fixation. This, combined with a compound the organism produced, drove them to bite, an efficient means of spreading the pathogen. This wasn't a natural evolution. The precision of its effects suggested deliberate manipulation. Yet carbon dating showed the sample was about 25,000 years old, long before humans had the capability for genetic engineering. If not human-made, then what was the source? I moved on to the video files. Most of them were corrupted, but one played. It showed Fallon in his lab speaking directly to the camera. He looked worn out, his face shadowed by dark circles under his eyes. "I've confirmed it now," he said. The Soviet research ship wasn't out there exploring for resources, as they claimed. They were following coordinates found in German documents captured after World War II. The Germans had an expedition to the Iditarod Islands in 1938, looking for something specific. Both the Soviets and the Germans were working from the same text, a pre-Inuit manuscript that spoke of sleepers in the ice who would one day rise and feed on the living. He paused, as if struggling to comprehend the enormity of what he was revealing. They thought it was just a metaphor. It wasn't. What they found was a pathogen that defies all modern scientific understanding. The Soviets attempted to turn it into a weapon, but it quickly became uncontrollable. Their vessel was deliberately sunk when the infection breached the containment on board. But here's the critical part. The pathogen they discovered wasn't the only sample. The permafrost in northern Alaska holds additional deposits. With the rapid thawing of the permafrost due to global warming, we're likely to see more outbreaks. Whittier won't be the final one. The government is aware of this. What they're doing isn't merely a containment effort, it's an active research project. They're searching for all remaining deposits and working to secure them. However, I've seen classified documents that suggest they're still trying to weaponize the pathogen, despite the catastrophic outcome so far. They're playing with fire, and we're all going to get burned. The video cut out suddenly. I leaned back, my thoughts racing. This was more than just a cover-up. If Fallon's claims were true, the government wasn't just hiding outbreaks, they were actively researching the pathogen, perhaps even intentionally causing new infections in their pursuit to understand and control it. I needed more proof, concrete evidence that would withstand scrutiny. I had to get into Whittier itself, but doing so wouldn't be easy. The checkpoint at the tunnel entrance would be well guarded by now, and I was probably on some watch list. But there was another route in, the same path the original pathogen had taken, by sea. In Seward, I used cash to hire a small fishing boat. The captain, an older man named Peter, didn't ask questions when I paid him triple his usual rate. I told him I was a wildlife photographer hoping to take some photos of Whittier from the water. He was dubious, but agreed to take me. The next morning, we set out, navigating the waters of Prince William Sound. As we neared Whittier, the small port town looked normal from a distance. Lights were on in the buildings, and a Coast Guard cutter was docked at the main pier. "That's odd," Peter remarked. "I heard Whittier was closed for repairs, some kind of infrastructure issue." "Let's get closer," I suggested, "just for a few photos." Peter reluctantly complied, steering the boat within half a mile of the harbor. Through my binoculars, I saw that the town was far from normal. People moving about wore either military uniforms or hazmat suits. Large tents had been set up where the town square used to be, and the entire town was surrounded by a perimeter fence. "This doesn't look like infrastructure repairs," Peter said, now clearly suspicious. "No, it doesn't," I agreed. I began snapping dozens of photos, documenting everything I could see: the military presence, the containment measures, and the fact that none of the people I saw appeared to be civilians or original residents. As we observed, a large truck pulled up to one of the tents. Men in hazmat suits began unloading what appeared to be metal canisters. "We should leave," Peter suggested nervously. But before we could turn around, a Coast Guard patrol boat appeared, cutting off our path. "Civilian vessel, this is the Coast Guard. You've entered a restricted zone. Prepare to be boarded." Peter shot me a glare. "What have you gotten me into?" "I'm sorry," I replied, genuinely meaning it. "Let me handle this." The Coast Guard boarding team consisted of 4 men, none wearing standard Coast Guard uniforms. They carried automatic rifles and moved with the efficiency of special forces. "Identification," the leader ordered. I handed over a fake ID I'd purchased in Anchorage. Peter reluctantly showed his captain's license. "What's your business here?" the leader asked. "Wildlife photography," I said, pointing to my camera. "Didn't realize this area was off limits." The leader examined my ID carefully, then spoke into his radio. After a brief pause, he turned back to us. "Your vessel will be escorted back to Seward. You're both required to attend a security briefing upon arrival." They assigned 2 men to our boat to ensure our compliance. As we pulled away from Whittier, I discreetly removed the memory card from my camera, placed it in a waterproof case, and hid it in my boot. Back in Seward, we were taken to a plain government building. Peter was led into one room while I was taken to another. Inside, a man in a dark suit greeted me and introduced himself simply as Smith. He had a generic air about him. "Mr. Reynolds," he began, "or should I say, Officer Reynolds, you've traveled quite far from your post in Kodiak." I remained silent. "You've been asking a lot of questions about Whittier, speaking to people you shouldn't have, accessing information you shouldn't be accessing." I stayed quiet. "Let me make this clear. What happened in Whittier was a chemical spill from a Russian cargo ship. The town is temporarily closed for environmental cleanup. That's the story, and that's what you'll tell anyone who asks." "What if I don't?" I finally spoke. Smith gave a thin, calculating smile. "You've had an outstanding career with the Coast Guard up until now. It would be unfortunate to see that end with a dishonorable discharge or, even worse, federal charges for obstructing a national security operation. He pushed a document across the table. Sign this non-disclosure agreement, return to your post, and we can pretend this little incident never took place. I glanced down at the paper and then back at Smith. And what about the people of Whittier? The ones who didn't make it out? What do you tell their families? That's been dealt with, Smith replied coldly. And the next outbreak? Will that be taken care of as well? His face darkened. Just sign the document, Reynolds. I know what you're doing, I said. I know about the Soviet research vessel and the German expedition that came before it. This isn't the first outbreak, and it certainly won't be the last. For the first time, Smith looked genuinely surprised. Who have you been talking to? Enough people to uncover the truth, and I've documented everything. If anything happens to me, that documentation will be made public. Of course, it was a bluff. I hadn't had time to secure my evidence or set up a release plan, but Smith had no way of knowing that. He leaned back in his chair, evaluating me. What exactly do you want? The truth. What really happened in Whittier? What's going on right now? He was quiet for a long moment, then reached into his jacket, pulled out a cigarette, and lit it, ignoring the no smoking sign on the wall. The truth, he exhaled, smoke curling into the air. It's more complicated than you realize, and far more dangerous. Smith led me to a different room, one without windows or cameras. He instructed the guards to wait outside. What I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest level. If you speak of it, I'll deny everything and you'll disappear. Understood? I nodded. In 1938, a German expedition to the Diomede Islands uncovered something preserved in the ice. Remains of a civilization far older than any known human culture. Among the artifacts was a sealed container holding what appeared to be a biological sample. Sleepers in the ice. I paused, remembering Fallon's video. Smith raised an eyebrow but continued. The Germans tried to study it, but soon realized its potential as a weapon. When the tide of the war turned, they hid their research. The Soviets captured some of their findings in 1945. In 1982, they mounted an expedition to recover the original sample, I added. Yes, the infection spread throughout their research vessel. Everyone aboard perished. The Soviets sank the ship, but not before one researcher made it to shore near Nome. He carried the infection with him, though the cold slowed its progression. He stayed in a dormant state until 1984, when a hunting party found him. Barrow, 1984, I said. The initial outbreak. Smith gave a brief nod. We contained it, though at tremendous cost, but we kept samples for further examination. The military saw possible uses for it. As a weapon, I said, my voice dripping with disgust. As a deterrent, Smith corrected, his tone cool. Something so terrifying that no country would dare start a war if they knew we had it. But you couldn't control it. No. The Nome incident in '92 was due to a containment breach at a research facility. Smith continued. We shut it down and cleaned the area. And Whittier? Was that another breach? Smith paused, a flicker of hesitation crossing his face. Not exactly, he said. The fishing vessel Northern Light pulled something up in their nets, the remains of a Soviet researcher from the '82 expedition, frozen in the ice for 13 years. When they thawed him out, he wasn't dead, I finished, recalling Morgan's words. No, and the strain had mutated during its time in the ice, more aggressive, faster acting. By the time we were alerted, half the town was already infected. So you quarantined it and executed everyone who was infected. We disposed of the bodies, Smith said bluntly, not denying it. We had no other choice. The alternative was risking the spread of the infection throughout Alaska, maybe even beyond. And what about now? The mining community near Denali? Smith's eyes narrowed. Who told you about that? Does it matter? Is it happening again? Smith hesitated, then finally nodded. But this time, it's different. The pathogen has mutated again. The infected, they're smarter now. They can use tools, and some even retain the ability to speak. They're not just attacking randomly, I asked, a chill creeping down my spine. They're organized, Smith whispered, his voice dropping despite our isolation. The first generation of infected were mindless, driven by hunger and rage. These new ones, though, they coordinate. They set traps, target critical infrastructure, communications, power, transportation, everything that can isolate their victims. How is that even possible? I asked. The medical report said the pathogen destroys higher brain functions. Well, that was the original strain. This one's different. It's evolving. Smith ran a hand through his hair, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. The original theory was that the pathogen was changing, he said. Now, we believe it's developing something more, a kind of hive mind. The infected aren't individuals anymore. They've become nodes in a network, sharing information and working toward a single goal. And that goal is spreading and growing. We suspect the pathogen itself is becoming intelligent, using human hosts as vessels to expand its reach. That sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie, I said, though after everything I'd witnessed, I wasn't so sure anymore. 2 weeks ago, I would have agreed with you, Smith replied. Then we lost contact with a research team studying ice core samples near Denali. When the rescue team found them, they had changed. But they weren't mindless. They set up an ambush. 7 highly trained operatives were dead in minutes. Smith pulled out a tablet and showed me some helmet camera footage. The video began with a first-person view of a military team entering a research station. The place was dimly lit, equipment scattered everywhere. As they ventured deeper into the facility, figures lunged from the shadows. People with ashen skin and cloudy eyes, moving with unnatural speed and precision. What happened next was pure chaos. Screams, gunfire, and blood splattering everywhere. But what really disturbed me was the sound of the infected, no longer just mindless moans, but clear, deliberate commands. Lights, one low voice ordered. The room went completely dark. Flanking, another voice rasped. The camera continued recording, now lying on the floor. A face entered the frame, once human, now a twisted version of it. Milky eyes stared straight into the lens. We learn, it said, its voice like gravel. We adopt. We spread. And then the screen went black. Smith took the tablet back. That was 3 days ago, he said grimly. We've lost contact with 3 other communities within 50 miles of that research station. The contingency plan is now active. Full isolation of the interior, I murmured to myself. Smith raised an eyebrow, surprised. You're well informed. Yeah, I replied. We're establishing a quarantine line. Everyone outside the line is being evacuated. As for everyone inside, well, he let the silence linger. So, you're just going to leave everyone there? I asked. We're going to contain a threat to society, Smith replied firmly. The alternative is watching this spread beyond control, first across the country, then worldwide. There must be another way, I insisted. A cure, something we can give to people. We've been trying to develop one since 1984, he said. Nothing works. The pathogen adapts too quickly. So, what's next? You just cover it up again? We'll tell everyone it's an environmental disaster, Smith said without hesitation. A nuclear waste leak from an old Cold War site, he continued, nodding. We've already planted the story in the media. No one questions it. If someone does, they get discredited, or worse. His eyes met mine, and the unspoken threat was clear. Like Kowalski, like Dr. Reed. Smith didn't say another word. Why are you telling me all this? I asked. Why not just make me disappear like the others? Because we need people like you, Reynolds, Smith answered. People who ask questions, who seek the truth. But we need you asking the right questions and looking in the right places. You want me to help with the cover-up, I said, my voice tight with disbelief. To help save lives, he corrected. If the public knew the truth, there would be panic and chaos. Millions would die in the chaos of the evacuation from Alaska. Or they could protect themselves. He gestured at the tablet in front of him. Against this? There is no protection, I said flatly, only containment. I leaned back, trying to process everything. A part of me wanted to expose everything, but another part of me understood that Smith had a point. Panic could cost lives. I need time to think, I finally said. Smith nodded. You have until tomorrow morning, but remember, if you choose to go public, no one will believe you, and you won't live long enough to make them. He left me in the room, the door left unlocked behind him. It was a test, I realized. He wanted to see if I'd run. I didn't. Instead, I quietly removed the memory card from my boot and reviewed the photos I'd taken of Whittier. They confirmed everything Smith had already said. But there was something he hadn't mentioned. There were survivors, civilians being loaded onto military trucks. They were all restrained. They weren't just containing the outbreak. They were taking prisoners. I spent the night in a motel in Seward, mulling over my options. By morning, I still hadn't made up my mind. Smith had set up a meeting at a cafe near the harbor. When I arrived, he was already there, seated at a corner table with an envelope before him. So, have you made up your mind? He asked as I sat down. I thought about the photos, the civilians, restrained and taken away, clearly test subjects. We need to understand this pathogen to combat it, Smith continued, but those are just regular people. They're infected people who haven't fully turned, I countered. The restraints are for their safety as much as ours. You're experimenting on them, I said, and Smith didn't deny it. We're trying to save millions of lives. Sometimes that means making hard decisions like covering up outbreaks and silencing those who speak out. Yes, the greater good outweighs the individual, he added. I scrutinized him for a long moment. What's in the envelope? Your new identity, Smith replied. A position on a specialized task force within the CDC. Great salary, full benefits, and the opportunity to genuinely contribute to solving this threat. All you need to do is stay quiet. Work within the system, not against it. I thought about everything I had learned. The new strain near Denali, spreading through the Alaskan interior. I want to speak with Dr. Bakers, I said. I want access to all the research, all the data on past outbreaks. Done, Smith agreed quickly. And the survivors from Whittier, I'd like to oversee their treatment. No unnecessary testing, no experiments without their consent. Smith hesitated, then nodded. I can arrange that. I'll need it in writing, signed by whoever's running this operation. You'll have it by the end of the day, Smith said, pushing the envelope toward me. Welcome to the team, Doctor. Reynolds. I opened the envelope. Inside was a CDC ID card with my photo but a different name. Also, a dossier detailing my fake background as an epidemiologist specializing in Arctic pathogens. It's a solid cover, Smith remarked. It's close enough to your real expertise that you'll be convincing. What if I change my mind? What if I decide to go public? I asked. His smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Let's hope it doesn't come to that. I took the ID card, feeling as though I had just made a deal with the devil. Yet there was a part of me that felt something else, a glimmer of hope. Maybe, from the inside, I could actually make a difference, find a solution that didn't involve abandoning innocent civilians or covering up the truth. When do I begin? Right away. There's a helicopter waiting at the airfield. It'll take you to our containment facility near Denali. Smith stood up. Dr. Bakers will meet you there. As we exited the cafe, I noticed Peter, the boat captain who had brought me to Whittier, observing us from across the street. His face reflected a mix of confusion and suspicion. I quickly turned away, unable to meet his gaze. There will be people you can't explain this to, Smith said, catching my discomfort. Former colleagues, friends, even family. That's all part of the sacrifice. I understand, I replied, though the full weight of that sacrifice was only just starting to sink in. The helicopter ride to the facility took almost 2 hours. Below us, the vast Alaskan wilderness sprawled out endlessly, majestic and indifferent to the human drama unfolding above it. The facility itself turned out to be an old military base surrounded by double fences of razor wire. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter, and I spotted snipers stationed at watchtowers. Dr. Bakers was waiting for me when I landed. Her face was unreadable. You agreed to join, she stated flatly, not asking a question. I thought you wanted me to expose the truth, I responded quietly. I wanted you to know the truth. What you do with it has always been your decision. And you? Why are you here? I asked, looking at her. Dr. Bakers glanced toward the main building of the facility. Because this is where I can make a real difference. This is where I can possibly find a way to stop this thing. Smith said the pathogen was evolving, developing a hive mind. Dr. Bakers nodded somberly. Come with me. There's something you need to see. She led me to a secure part of the facility. After passing through several checkpoints and undergoing decontamination procedures, we arrived at an observation room. Through a large window, I saw into a containment chamber where a lone figure sat shackled to a chair. Once, the person had been a man, probably in his 40s, but now his skin was a dull gray streaked with black veins. His eyes were milky, but they still tracked our movements with unnerving accuracy. This is patient 23. He was part of the research team near Denali, infected 7 days ago. He hasn't fully changed, I asked, noticing that while the man's appearance was altered, he wasn't showing the extreme aggression or hunger that the reports had mentioned. He's changed, but not like the others. He's something different. As if on cue, patient 23 spoke. His voice was raspy but coherent. New visitors, new perspectives, useful. I stepped back involuntarily. He's aware? More than aware, Dr. Bakers replied. He's been helping us understand the pathogen voluntarily. Why would he do that? Ask him yourself. I moved closer to the intercom. Patient 23, can you hear me? The infected man grinned, showing blackened gums. I hear you, Doctor. Reynolds, former Coast Guard, now the newest member of the team. I looked at Dr. Bakers, my alarm rising. How does he know that? We don't know, she admitted. He knows things he shouldn't know. Names, dates, details about other containment sites. I turned back to the intercom. Why are you helping us? Not helping you, he answered. Helping us, all of us. The old way is inefficient. Mindless aggression, reckless spread. It attracts attention. It creates resistance. And the new way? I asked, dreading the response. Selective, careful, patient. His milky eyes seemed to pierce right through me. When we learn from each host, adapt and improve, the next generation will be better. Next generation of what? I asked, my stomach churning. Patient 23 tilted his head, his movement unnaturally fluid. Of life. Your kind had its time. Now, it's our turn. Dr. Bakers pulled me away from the intercom. That's enough for today. He gets excited with new people. Once we were safely outside the containment area, I confronted her. What was that? It talked about us like we're no longer human. It's not, Dr. Bakers said plainly. The pathogen doesn't just hijack the body. It rewrites DNA. It creates something new. Patient 23 is a hybrid, part human, part something else. And you're keeping him alive and letting him speak to you? We need to grasp the nature of what we're facing. And he's not the only one. Dr. Bakers guided me into her office, where a series of wall-mounted monitors displayed real-time data from several containment chambers. We have 17 subjects in various stages of transformation, all linked to the Denali outbreak. The civilians I saw being taken from Whittier? It's a different situation, Doctor. Bakers interrupted. The Whittier strain was aggressive, primal. Most of those infected had to be neutralized to maintain control. A few in the early stages were brought in for study, but they fully transformed within hours. And the Denali strain? I asked, hoping for a glimmer of something better. It progresses slower, with more control. The infected don't immediately attack. They integrate into the environment, hide symptoms, and spread deliberately. Dr. Baker's pulled up a map showing red markers radiating outward from Denali. By the time we recognized the pattern, it had already reached these communities, she said, pointing to the large areas marked in red. The infection has reached a concerning portion of the Alaskan interior, including the quarantine line. She nodded grimly. We're evacuating everyone we can from the coastal regions and the interior. She trailed off, not finishing her thought. When will the quarantine be complete? I asked, my heart sinking. 72 hours, she replied. After that, nothing will pass the line, not by land, not by air, not by sea. And if the infection reaches the quarantine line, her face darkened, we have contingency plans. Like what? She paused, gathering her thoughts before speaking quietly. Cleansing protocols. Nuclear? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Among other options, she confirmed. Nothing is off the table. I sank into a chair, the weight of the situation settling heavily on my shoulders. This can't be real, I muttered. It is, she said calmly, and it has been since 1984. The question now is whether we can find a permanent solution this time instead of just another temporary fix. Can patient 23 help? I asked, almost afraid of the answer. If he's cooperating, maybe, Dr. Baker said thoughtfully. Or he could be deceiving us, leading us down the wrong path away from real countermeasures. She rubbed her tired eyes. That's the danger with this new strain. We can't trust anything they say. They're too intelligent. But they're not invulnerable, I pointed out. The pathogen still has weaknesses. It couldn't survive in the Soviet researcher until he was thawed out. Dr. Bakers looked up at that, surprised. Extreme cold? I asked. Yes, she said, her expression sharp. That remains effective against every strain we've encountered. It doesn't kill the pathogen, but it puts it into a dormant state. Could we use that? I asked, suddenly hopeful. Induce hypothermia in the infected? It's possible on a case-by-case basis, Dr. Bakers answered, but it's not feasible for large-scale containment. She hesitated before adding, although I leaned forward, sensing something more. The original Soviet research, she continued slowly, was focused on developing a delivery system for the pathogen, an aerosol that could spread it quickly through a population. Baker quickly moved to her computer, typing at an impressive speed. We might be able to modify that strategy, she said, focusing on the screen. We could create an aerosol that administers a substance to trigger rapid, localized hypothermia. Freeze them from the inside, I said, piecing it together. Exactly. It won't eradicate the pathogen, but it would immobilize the infected, rendering them harmless. It gives us the time we need to devise a more permanent solution. For the first time since hearing the distress calls from Whittier, I felt a flicker of hope. How soon could we make something like that happen? The resources here might take a week, Baker began, but then paused, her gaze fixed on one of the monitors. That's strange, she muttered. What's going on? Patient 23's vital signs are spiking and dipping wildly. She moved to another screen, bringing up the live feed from his containment cell. Patient 23 was seizing, foam frothing from his mouth. And then, as abruptly as it started, he fell still. The monitors flatlined. "He's gone," I stated. Baker frowned, shaking her head. "That's impossible. The pathogen keeps the host alive, preserves it." Before she could elaborate, a loud alarm blared, echoing through the facility. Red lights began flashing, and the announcement rang out. "Containment breach in Sector 7. All personnel evacuate immediately." "Sector 7? That's where the other test subjects are housed," I said, piecing it together. "Could they have escaped?" Baker's expression darkened. "Impossible. Unless patient 23 wasn't having a seizure. He was communicating." "With the other infected?" I asked, unsure. "I don't know. It could be some sort of biochemical signaling," Baker speculated. "But if I'm right, this was coordinated." Without another word, Baker rushed toward the door. "We need to get to the command center now." As we sprinted through the halls, the facility descended into complete disorder. Armed personnel rushed past, heading toward Sector 7, while scientists and support staff ran in the opposite direction, trying to escape. Through a window that overlooked the courtyard, I saw military helicopters taking off. "They're not coming in to reinforce," I said aloud, realizing what was happening. "They're leaving. They're abandoning the facility." Baker nodded, her face grim. "It's standard procedure during a major containment breach," she explained as we ran. "If the infected can't be contained, the site is declared compromised. All non-essential personnel are evacuated." "And then cleansing protocols," I muttered, finishing her thought. We arrived at the command center to find it nearly empty. Only a handful of senior staff remained, desperately coordinating the evacuation. Among them was Smith, who was barking orders into a radio. "Status report," he demanded. "Status report." Smith barked as soon as he saw us. "Patient 23 is dead, but I'm convinced he somehow communicated with the other test subjects before he passed." This was a coordinated effort. Smith swore under his breath. "Sector 7 is completely overrun. The infected have breached 3 security checkpoints and are moving toward the east wing." "The armory," Baker realized, "and the communication center," I added. "Just like Itanali, they're hitting the infrastructure first." Smith didn't waste a moment. "Baker, Reynolds, follow me." "Where to?" I asked. "To make sure what happened here stays here." Smith led us to a secure elevator, one that required both retinal scans and fingerprint verification to activate. As we descended, Baker touched my arm. "Reynolds, there's something you need to know about the Soviet research vessel, about why the government's been so insistent on keeping this all under wraps." "What is it?" I asked, but before she could respond, the elevator reached its destination. We had arrived in a bunker far beneath the facility. The room was small, dominated by a solitary computer terminal. Smith walked over to the terminal and began entering commands. "Dr. Baker, I'll need your authorization code," he said. Baker hesitated for a moment before stepping forward and typing in a long string of numbers. "What's going on here?" I asked, glancing between them. "Insurance," Smith replied, his tone grim. "For worst-case scenarios." The screen flickered to life, displaying a countdown clock. 15 minutes and counting down. You're going to destroy the facility, I realized. With everyone still inside, I added, horrified. Most of the essential personnel have already been evacuated, Smith said. The remaining evacuation routes have been blocked by the infected. We don't have any other options. There has to be another way, I insisted. Baker was working on a cold therapy delivery system, Smith said, cutting me off. If we had more time. We don't have more time, Smith interrupted. The quarantine line is still being established. If even one infected person escapes this facility, the whole operation is compromised. So we just stay here and die with them? I asked, frustration creeping into my voice. Smith didn't respond immediately. Instead, he moved to a wall panel and placed his palm against it. The panel slid open, revealing a small elevator inside. This will take us to a secure bunker 3 miles away, he explained. We have 15 minutes to reach the safe zone before detonation, Smith announced as we entered the elevator. As it began its ascent, I turned to Baker. You were about to tell me something, I said. She glanced at Smith, who gave a small, subtle nod. The Soviets didn't stumble upon the pathogen by chance, she began. What do you mean? I asked, confused. They were following up on American research from the 1950's, she explained. Officially, it was a military facility beneath the Greenland ice sheet. Unofficially, it was where we first studied samples of the pathogen recovered from the German expedition. We created this? I asked, stunned. Not created, Baker corrected. Weaponized, enhanced. The original pathogen was dangerous, but it had limits. It couldn't survive in temperatures above freezing, so we made adjustments. Why? I asked. The Cold War, she answered. We needed an advantage over the Soviets, something that would make conventional warfare obsolete. She paused, a grim look crossing her face. But it got out of control. The first major breach happened in 1962. We contained it, but not before Soviet intelligence got wind of the project. So, they launched their own expedition in 1982 to recover samples from the original site. And now we're paying for that mistake over and over again, Baker said. The elevator reached its destination with a soft jolt. We stepped into a tunnel carved deep into the bedrock. At the far end, a military Humvee waited. We have 12 minutes, Smith said, checking his watch. As we drove through the tunnel, I tried to process everything Baker had just revealed. The government hadn't just been covering up natural outbreaks from an ancient pathogen. They'd been hiding their own involvement in enhancing and weaponizing it. The public deserves to know the truth, I said at last. They will, Baker replied, surprising me. Eventually. What do you mean? I asked. This isn't just about containment anymore, she continued. It's about preparing for what's coming. The pathogen is already in the environment, in the melting permafrost, in Arctic waters. We can't contain it forever, she added. Sooner or later, an outbreak will occur that we can't stop. So, what are we doing about it? I asked. Controlled disclosure, Smith said. In the next 5 years, research papers will start appearing about theoretical pathogens preserved in Arctic ice. News stories we'll talk about how climate change is releasing ancient microorganisms. We'll prepare the public without causing panic. In the meantime, we'll continue developing other countermeasures. Your cold therapy idea has potential, Smith said. We'll take it forward at the backup facility. The Humvee emerged from the dark tunnel and into the vast Alaskan wilderness. In the distance, I saw the containment facility surrounded by helicopters, setting up a defensive perimeter. We reached the bunker with only 4 minutes left. As we descended deeper into its secure depths, Baker continued to explain the long-term plan. The truth will eventually surface, Reynolds, but it will be managed carefully. We need to let people process it gradually, with solutions already in place to prevent society from breaking down. We reached the command center just as the countdown hit 0. On the monitors, we watched in silence as a series of violent explosions tore through the containment facility, reducing it to nothing but wreckage. "That won't destroy the pathogen," I said, "just the host. And any evidence of what happened there?" I stared at the wreckage on the screen, my heart heavy with dread for what the future held. 30 years had passed since the Whittier incident. The team I had been part of had evolved from a containment protocol into a global initiative. Just as Baker had predicted, the truth had trickled out over time. Scientific journals began publishing articles about ancient pathogens found in the permafrost. News outlets reported on sporadic outbreaks of novel diseases in the Arctic Circle. It was preparation without causing alarm. The cold therapy method proved to be effective against the original strains, though it struggled against newer mutations. Still, it bought us valuable time to develop more precise treatments. We can now identify infected individuals before they fully turn. Baker continued, "We administer countermeasures that can suppress the pathogen indefinitely. But the disease isn't gone. As climate change accelerates, more ancient pathogens are being unearthed every year. The fight is far from over."